Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about designing mods for the first time. Now this is just a talk, it's not a tutorial, right? Just some general advice. First of all, right, if you want to make big mods, you have to know pretty much every aspect of the modding scene, as in every aspect of the game you're modding. That's a lot to take in at first. If you that's quest mods like I make, that's the requirement for them. If you want to make general mods, smaller mods, with an aim to moving on to bigger ones, then I recommend you start with NPCs, because NPCs are used by everything, and if you learn how to use or how to mod NPCs, you've made a major step forward. I would then recommend you move on to houses, because that tells you how to make a cell, where all the action takes place. And then if you've done that, try a world space, a small world space. You can even make that inside a cell, like I used to do quite a lot, because that's the easiest way of doing it. That's where you use bits to make a cave, right, inside a cell. That cell could also be a home. It could also be a castle, anything. You just make it in a cell. If you want to do it the harder way, you make it in a proper world space. That's in where the landscape's generated. That tends to be a bit buggy in Bethesda's editors though, so it's not always the best way of doing it, especially when you're learning. But you can easily make a giant cave, stick a castle in the middle of it, or even put fake sky over the top if you have to. Right? But you can do it. It's possible. Right? So anyhow, so you've got your NPC. Right? You've now learned how to make a home. You've learned how to expand the idea of a home into a gigantic open area inside a cave with a castle and skeletons and whatever else you want to put, because skeletons are NPCs too, right? So you've got all the basics there for starting to make something epic. Now, once you've known all that, you start reading up on the commands. The commands you need in scripts, just to get a feel for what the script can do. Now, I recommend it's like reading a dictionary to find out what new words are in it, or what each word means. It's a similar kind of thing, but for programmers. So you go onto one of the wiki sites, that has all the commands, and you just read up the command. This one does this, that one allows you to add things to factions, that one there changes your alignment to a faction, this one here gives you an item, that one there takes an item away. Once you get a rough idea how that works, you can then write a script. That's when you start learning. Now, there are certain rules about programming that doesn't change or do not change. And I always found, right, that logic is the key ingredient that all languages tend to keep. I learnt with BASIC, moved on to AREX and a bunch of others, and whilst I've long since forgotten how to program in half the languages I've learnt, the rules stay the same. All I'm doing is learning the commands for the new language, and once I know the commands, the rules are already known to me. So it makes it easier for me to pick up a new language than it would be for a complete newbie. So you're having to learn the rules as well, right? And the rules are usually you're declaring variables, then how the variables are used, because the variables are important. They're usually in every single language, right? And you use to store information, and a variable, unlike a number or a letter, can be either a number or a letter or both at the same time. It depends, what you want to use it for. It's a storage, it's like a box you put information in. So if you say, right, that NPC's name's Bob, I must remember that. Bob goes in a box. You now remember it. That's how it works. Then later on you think, well, what does the if end command do? Oh, it's a question or a decision. You go, well, if Bob is in my house, call the guards. You see? So you drag Bob out the box. Yes, that's definitely Bob in my house. Right, put it back in the box, and then you execute a command that brings in NPC guards. This is why you look at the commands, because then you know how to structure it, that logic and how it works, and how commands are used to call other commands, and how to interpret things. It's the skill you have to learn. Because at the end of the day, if you can write in a logical way, A process of a decision making that needs to go through in order for certain things to happen. Like, for instance, right, a mammoth's charging towards you. How would an NPC interpret that? So, first of all, right, you're restricted by the commands you've got available. Is mammoth within 100 of me? Yes. Crap yourself. you know? So it's like that, right? So the is within command is a popular one. So you go is within distance of me. That's a detection radius. You could use that for stealth scripts. So you can make yourself a stealthy archer, NPC using the same method. So the is within is mammoth. Is mammoth is within blah blah me or the player, and then you've got a list of things. You could put NPC move towards house, get in the house of the mammoth cat, crush you, that kind of thing. It's all about knowing the commands, and the commands give you options, and the options are what you put down in the script. That's what you've got to learn. So anyway, you've got your scripts now. You've got your NPC, you've got your world space, you've got all the ingredients now for start making, say, a large mod, a quest mod, or even just a merchant or something like that. Because the merchant aspect of it's very easy to pick up. You could read that on a wiki and get it done. But it's all about breaking it down. You break everything down into its component steps and learn them steps one thing at a time until eventually you know everything you need to know. If you try doing it all at once, you'll confuse yourself. If you try doing it a little bit at a time, then you'll succeed. Now the merchants, that's just a chest owned by the merchant. Now if you want to add dialogue, you've got to learn the dialogue side. That's a whole new ball game. Dialogue requires recording, requires lip sync generation, it requires lines and scripts and stuff like that. Because you can attach the scripts to an NPC talking, so when people click on dialogue, a certain script is executed, like you're right, nobody, you're right, yeah, click, that you say that to NPC and he calls his mates and there's a big fight, you see? So he summons friends or NPCs into the room to attack you. So you can do all kinds of stuff. And that's when it gets interesting, is when you can start doing that in the game, when you can create things and then you start wanting to show off. Like having two Knights of the Nine walk out from a hidden position and stand next to a priest. Especially if you've got the armour on it as well at the time. And it kind of creates emotional moments which players tend to remember. So you build it up slowly. That way you can achieve big things. And when you are making a big mod, it's the same rule again. Take it in small chunks. With me, I started doing the basic mod, the basic requirements. That was version 1. So I thought of a mod, right? What do I want to make? I want to make a faction. So it needs a guild. You need to be able to join the guild, and you need a few missions, right? So I'd start with, I'll just do an arbitrary 10 missions for version 1, right? So that was the big one. That was the big thing I need to do. So make the guild first, fill it with NPCs, right? Add some quests, right? The dialogue and that lot else, that all the rest of them speak, that would be added in 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, just to pad it out a little bit. So you get your basic mod at version 1. It's just the guild, some missions and some NPCs. And then you start filling it up, padding it out. And when you've got it roughly to where you wanted it to be for the 1.x series, you move on to version 2. Version 2 might add 10 more quests and a few more locations. And then suddenly the mod's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. By the time you get to version 4, you've got 40 quests, thousands of locations and dialogue fully on all the NPCs, So you've got a very different mod from version 1. It is much visibly better than the first version. That's how you make a large successful quest mod. That's how Helgen, Return to Helgen got made. That's how Kvatch Rising got made. Not Kvatch Rising, Kvatch Aftermath. Kvatch Rising was done more or less in one thing just to make a point. That you can make city mods fairly quickly. It doesn't have to take 2 or 3 years. That was the point of making Kvatch Rising in the first place. But anyway, the point I'm making here, though, is that you can make each new full version like 1, 2, 3, 4 and add tons to it and then spend 2.1 or 3.1 or 4.1 to add the little bits that are missing to get it complete. So the 4.x series is finished in its own right before you move on to adding more to it. Eventually, though, you will reach a point where you'll want to say that's enough, right? Because as a mod maker, you tend to be always wanting to add more. But at some point, you have to say that's enough. I mean, there are some mods I'd love to add more to, like the Fighters Guild. And there are other mods, which are complete, like Kavach Rising and Return to Helgen. You see, so it depends on the mod you're making. But some players will wait for you to say it's complete before they'll try it. Right? And in my mods, I'm waiting a long time because my mods are never complete. I'm always expanding and adding to them because I get into it. I get in that frame of mind. But even I eventually recognise that this has to be the end of the mod. This is the logical end. Everything's been done that I wanted to achieve. And that's when you stop, and that's when you start making your next mod. But it all starts and it continues all the way through by taking little chunks at a time. Whether you're dealing with just an NPC or a massive quest mod, it's the same principle. You go through the same process of tackling little problems at a time. Anyhow, that's the way you need to think about things when you're making mods. That's how you start. So if you're starting to make an epic quest mod or a faction mod, start with one NPC and go from there. See you in the next one.